is such a huge topic, right?
Yes.
Because so many people battle, stage fright, or they get nervous, or they deal with anxiety, performance anxiety, and and early on in my career, I had to deal with a little bit of that too, and for a little while. I think that the way that maybe let me flip the question. I'll answer the second part first,
Yes.
which is how to deal with stage fright, or performance anxiety. And that really is a couple of things, but mostly it's just being prepared. If you prepare, then you can have confidence. But sometimes, even if you've prepared a lot, and you are prepared, there's still the chance of there being some anxiety with performers.
Mhm.
No matter how much you've trained, no matter how much you're ready, there's things that can get inside of our head. And I think what that is that we have assigned consequences to our actions that might be a little bit out of proportion. I ask students all the time. I say, okay, so why are you feeling anxious, or why are you scared? And it always comes down to these things. Well, it's what will the audience think, and what will the other musicians think? If I make a mistake, maybe they'll never hire me again, or and some of this is justified, those kinds of thoughts. But I think sometimes we just get a little bit out of proportion, because we perform better when we're relaxed. When we're relaxed, we perform much better. And so if there's some things that we can do, mentally, to take, that out of, that feeling of being anxious out of our way, we always perform better. So, I always use that analogy I was telling you is, consequence is what makes us nervous. And we could list all of the consequences. Okay, the other musicians might not like our playing. Maybe they won't want to hire us again. Okay, well, we can, if we're prepared, we can, we can have less of that happening, right? Okay, maybe the audience members might not enjoy the performance. That's very rare, to be honest. Most of the time, people in the audience want us to succeed. They're there not to judge us as much as they are to enjoy our performance. Okay, so if we can get that in our mind, that we're there to provide some enjoyment for the audience. Okay, if we can start to replace the negative consequences with some positive consequences, well, what are we there for? We're there to make people, feel good. But I always use this analogy. I say, okay, if, in the United States, a sidewalk is usually about 4 feet wide. Okay. If we went outside right now and I said, Sergio, run on this sidewalk as fast as you can for 50 yards, 50 meters. You'd be able to do that. You'd be able to run and stay on the sidewalk. And the chance of you falling off the sidewalk is pretty slim. And if we took a class of students who, are healthy and their legs work properly, and we said, run on this sidewalk, they would all be able to run on that sidewalk without falling off. But if I take that sidewalk and I put that sidewalk 10,000 feet in the air, between two mountains, maybe for 50 meters, they got to go across this, and there's no hand railing or there's no guard. And I said, run as fast as you can on this, on this sidewalk. We're probably going to lose a few people. They're going to end up just, going off the sidewalk. And I always ask, students, well, do you agree with me? And they say, absolutely. I would be the one that would run off I would be the one that ran off the sidewalk. And I'm like, well, why? And, they have a bunch of different reasons. So somebody will always say, well, there might be a lot of wind, up there on the sidewalk. Well, I don't know. I always ask the question back, when is the last time a strong wind blew you off a sidewalk? Like, it would have to be an enormous wind to blow somebody off a sidewalk, right?
Yeah.
Like, like hurricane, force.
Something really bad.
Something very, very bad. And so I'm actually, I'm going to rule that out. I think what would happen, though, is that we have now assigned a consequence. Okay. If we're running out here just outside the office, and there's grass on the side, if you run off the sidewalk, big deal. You run in the grass. There's really not a negative consequence. Maybe if you're wearing nice shoes and they might get a little muddy. That's the worst thing that's going to happen. But like, you go up 10,000 feet and the consequence is imminent death. Like, you are definitely not going to survive that fall. And so now we've assigned a consequence, which is going to make us think about our actions more than we should, because running is something that we do very naturally, right? We do it very naturally. So if I'm running and I start thinking about the mechanics of running, I got to move my left leg, I got to move my right leg. Oh, I might be dragging my toe. Oh, I need to change this. I need to change that. Oh, there's so much on the line that I start to think, that's when I'm going to screw up. Mm-hmm. So I think if we can get into a headspace where we assign positive consequences to our performances more than we assign negative consequences to our performances, it can really, really help with our, with our anxiety. When I started really being a professional musician, like I got out of school, I had a master's degree. I was living in Florida. I went to the University of South Florida. Studied with some amazing professors there, and I'll tell you, for the second part of your question, I'll tell you one story. But I think the big thing was I got a job working for Mel Bay Publications as like the senior editor, but also I was like a clinician for them, and so they sent me all over the world to play guitar and to teach things that were had been published in our books. And it was a way to sell a couple of things. It was a way to sell more books because I could kind of help people understand, like what this book was about or that book was about. So I had certain books that I would teach from. It was also to raise the visibility of the company by having, a guy who could play the guitar that was representing the company. And it was also a way for me to go out and meet the best players and the best teachers in different areas of the world, and then help them develop their pedagogical methods, and then we would bring them back to Mel Bay and publish them. So I was doing a few things, with playing. But what it ended up being was, my career ended up that for the first several years, if I played at a workshop or if I did a concert, it was just a room full of guitar players. It wasn't, just normal people off the street. I was playing for people who like knew the instrument and knew the music pretty well in some cases. And that can be a little bit intimidating when you're like, okay, I got to go perform and there's, 100 people in the audience and, at a small club or a, small concert hall. But it's like every one of them plays the guitar and they probably play pretty well, and they're like sitting there, I felt like they were judging me a lot. And so that's what I had to do, was I had to deal with that aspect of of feeling insecure, feeling intimidated, feeling inadequate, and start to replace the negative consequences in my mind with positive consequences. And, some of the things I'd say is like, I know that there's some great musicians that are listening to me, but I've studied, and they're here really to kind of support me, and, and they want to be inspired also. So the best gift I can give them is to just play relaxed and play in a way that, like one, lets me, express my feelings, but two, that, I can demonstrate, what I've learned on the guitar. And it worked, for me. Now I'm very relaxed because and this will kind of sound bad, but when I play, I kind of don't care what people think anymore. You know, I have a little switch that I just turn it off, and I just say, I only care about the music. And if the music is right, it will translate over to the people, and the people will have a good experience. And if I can provide that, then I did my job as a musician. If I give them a good experience, then I did my job as a musician. And in the meantime, I'm going to have fun doing it also.
For you?
Well, of course, my dad. My dad was probably my.
Who is your dad?
My dad is Mike Christiansen. And he's
a little bit of his background.
He ran the guitar program at Utah State University for more than 35 years. He is really a celebrated author. Wrote a lot of books. Some of them for Mel Bay Publications. Some of them under his own publishing company. And some other publishing companies as well. I mean, he's done everything. He's a great multi-style. He plays classical, he plays jazz, he plays rock and roll, he plays bluegrass. I mean, he's a great guitar player. And so I grew up around that. And even though I grew up in a very small town that didn't have a lot of, musicians like a big city would, I had good musicians around me all the time because of my dad. And not just the musicians, I had good music. He always had records, and recordings at the house that I was able to listen to. So that would be my number one, mentor. Number two would be Jack Peterson, who I studied with at the University of South Florida. Jack's pretty famous for, I think he was the first guitar teacher at Berklee School of Music in Boston. He pioneered the jazz guitar program at the University of North Texas, through the 80s. He moved to Florida. That's where I was able to study with him, was down in Florida. He taught at University of North Florida for a little while. Then he moved to the University of South Florida. So Jack was great. And I had another great teacher named Jack Wilkins. And I'm going to mention Jack Wilkins because Jack was a great example to me of always being calm. He's just a calm personality. And I wasn't always a calm personality, and maybe I'm still not a very calm personality, but I'm more calm than I was. But Jack Wilkins was such a inspiration to me, because he was always so calm, and he always used to, kind of have this attitude of, well, like the more you practice, the less you'll be nervous, right? But I used to play gigs, I used to play some music with Jack, and we were coming back one night, and he was driving me back home from a gig, and we got talking, and I had mentioned that I had been reading that the classical guitarist Christopher Parkening, who's a very celebrated classical guitarist, had also won the international fly casting competition. He's an amazing fly fisherman, and has amazing technique, for casting, with a fly rod. And I said, that's pretty incredible, isn't it? And he wasn't even didn't even seem overly impressed. He's just driving, and he said, I said, can you believe it? I said, he's one of the greatest, classical guitarists of his era. And he's also he won the international fly casting competition. He was the best in the world at fly casting. And Jack just said, yeah, well, some people just know how to practice. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Some people just know how to practice. And I was like, you know what? He's right. Christopher Parkening is probably talented. He probably has good hand-eye coordination naturally. But what the real secret is he knows how to practice. So he knows how to set goals. He knows how to achieve what he wants to achieve, and he knows how to put a plan together to get there. And so a lot of times, when I'm teaching, that's what I'm thinking about with students. It's like, okay, well, what's the goal here? And then how are we going to help them set goals? Because as a teacher, what I've decided more and more is that there really isn't that much teaching that goes on in this world. There's more learning than teaching. I can give you information, but I can't force you to get good at it.
Mhm.
And I'm not even sure that it's a teacher's job to motivate, because the motivation has to come here. We can help with that. We can encourage. But I think what the best thing, and I think this is what I've tried to do the most, the best thing I can do as a teacher is help students become curious. Because if they become curious, they will figure things out. And then they'll ask extra questions. And then they'll be concerned when they don't do something right because they want to get good at it. So if you're curious, that will fuel your passion. If you have a little bit of passion and a lot of curiosity, I think that's better than having a lot of passion and a little bit of curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, because if I can make them curious about how things work or how to get better, students will generally figure it out. And the other thing I found, Sergio, is that like my way of learning isn't the only way to do things. And my way of playing isn't the only way to play. And my way of thinking is not the only way to think.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what I have to do is to be an effective teacher is kind of help the student figure out what's the best way, you know, that they figure out how to learn. And then I can kind of fuel it. You know, and you've kind of seen me teach classes. I usually try to teach a subject and I teach it 2 or 3 different ways because I'm like, there's a way that I think about it, but that might not be the best way for the other 20 people in the class or 15 people in the class. Or even in a private lesson, the way I do it might not be the best way. I have to figure out what's the best way for them so they'll become more curious.
Mm-hmm.